Welcome to the Action Network podcast. I am your host, Evan Abrams, and today we've got a real special one for you. Not only is it kind of the comeback of me and, on pods for football and getting ready for the season, but today is our annual Anytime Touchdown Manifesto with touchdown betting extraordinaire Gilles Gallant. Gilles, listen, before we get into this, I have two questions for you.
Sure.
Number one, how excited are you for the upcoming NFL season? I need something good out of you. And of course, what is your first touchdown bet for week one? I got to know that right off the top.
Well, so if you had asked me that question like a month ago, I'd probably be like, I'm kind of mixed. And then about a week ago, our boss messaged us to talk about this podcast and saying, could we do this again? And it was like I saw the bat signal with the NFL logo. Like I was like, oh, NFL is coming back. So my mood changed very quickly once we started getting ready and researching for this podcast. So yeah, I am stoked for the NFL season. I have started to look at week one. I've got a couple early leans for week one, but I was looking at, of course, Cowboys Eagles, because obviously being a Cowboys fan, wanted to look at the opener. Evan, I think Jake Ferguson, I think he might get a touchdown because he did not score all of last year, was very hot coming into the year. He's around plus 350 right now to score against the Eagles. Just got a nice contract from Jerry. So let's ride the Ferg. Jake Ferguson, anytime touchdown against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, we know the NFL season's back when you're taking the tight end on a 7-point dog in the opener. So I can't wait to get ready for this one. But listen, today we'll get into all the ins and outs of betting anytime touchdowns in the NFL. So let's jump in, and we're going to go section by section here and really let Gilles kind of talk about his process, talk about how he does, week to week, all these different players, and then closer to kickoff of the games, we're going to have a ton of written content where he's also going to go into a lot of these different theories and strategies and tips. So definitely be on the look for that. But let's just start off the top here with the three most important rules from your point of view. And then I'll kind of give my perspective, but I'll let you take the floor here.
For sure, yeah. And I've been betting touchdowns now for 7 years, but I've really been doing it with Action Network now for 3 years. This is my 4th season coming in. And when I look at the full scope of all of my NFL bets, it's around over 90% of all of my NFL bets are coming from the touchdown market. So I've had a lot of experience doing this. So the three most important rules for me, we'll start off with just an easy one here. And some of this will be common sense to people, but I still feel like if the new bettors who are coming in, recreational bettors, this is still very helpful information. But you got to track your wins and losses, track all of your bets. So naturally, we're company men. Action Network has a great app that can allow this for you and do this for you because, like, for example, if somebody who is betting anytime touchdowns just as straight bets, forget about the parlays, like their win rate can range anywhere from obviously 0% to probably closer to like 35%. Think about it as similar to the way that you see success with guys who are betting home run bets in Major League Baseball. But they'll tell you, just like home run bets, just like touchdowns, very volatile market, lots of swings. There's good luck, there's bad luck. And I find by using something like the Action app to be able to track your picks, it helps you to be able to just see your overall profitability, but just it's important to know where you're being successful, where you're failing, if you need to adapt that strategy. Now, obviously, Action app, I think, will be able to help you with that. But even if you don't end up using the Action app, just use something, track it, pen and paper. I don't care. Just you got to track what you're doing throughout the season. But so that's rule number one. Rule number two, forget about win percentage. It's all about the profits and ROI. And as I said, like those home run bets, anything with large odds, win percentage just can't be your primary metric for success. And I find a lot of the time on social media, you'll see kind of some of these accounts, Evan, on social kind of not mislead, but kind of just be a little indirect with what they're talking about and saying like, I'm hitting 70% of my bets, but they kind of downplay the steam of what they're playing. So I find that sometimes with touchdown bets, if you're using win percentage, it can be a little misleading when it comes to the profitability of that. So that would be rule number two. And then rule number three, this is arguably, in my opinion, the most important, is using odds comparison tools. We have a great one with the Action Network website that you can use to be able to compare different odds at different sports books. And I find that you also have to have multiple sports books to be able to take advantage of said edges. And one player that I always think of, we were actually just talking about him off air with our producer, David, who went to BYU. We were talking about Taysom Hill. Now, Taysom is going to probably be out for a good portion of the year, but over the previous years, Evan, what you would see is you would look at sports books and you would see it on a given week. One day you would see one book, you would see them at like plus 190, and then another one you would see them at like plus 450. And if you don't have multiple sports books and multiple outs to be able to go look at those different discrepancies, you're going to leave money on the table, and that'll kind of ensure that you get those long-term profits by getting the best odds. So those are the three rules. We're going to start off with track your bets. Profits and ROI are more important than win percentage, and use odds comparison tools with multiple sportsbook outs.
Yeah, I think all three of them kind of tie together, to be honest. Like, if you're going to do one of them, you're most likely already having the data to do all three. And I will say one thing about the action app. So you tap someone to like bet a touchdown, anytime touchdown, and then all of the books just list below it. So it is really just super easy to be able to see from book to book, depending on what state you are, and in terms of the touchdown score itself. I will say, like, one person that comes to mind is like Yoshavash in terms of touchdown.
Yep.
Yeah. So like, just to be like, I feel like it's almost those like third wide receivers or the backup running backs. So you go from book to book and it can be like very different, which is a very good tip. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about data, because I think when you're doing research for touchdowns themselves, a lot of people look at the box score maybe to start, and then you start to realize there are other stats that give you a little bit more information. So why don't you dive into this, and then
Sure.
I'll tell you, at least when I do it, I'll tell you which ones I use, but I think all of these are important. So
well, you're one of the data kings I refer to, right? So I think that like if somebody who could talk data, you would be one of those guys I would refer to. But I guess it goes back to like good data versus bad data. And I don't necessarily think that there is bad data out there. I think my issue is that a lot of times, especially newer bettors or maybe even recreational bettors, they'll just kind of weigh the traditional stats way heavier than what is there's more data out there now. So like if you're betting on a wide receiver touchdown prop, the general stuff like snap counts, targets, receptions, those are all readily available online. You can find those. Those are obviously important, but they're just already kind of factored into the odds a lot of the time, Evan. And I find a lot of the time that's not really going to provide you an edge, where now I've found over the last couple of seasons, I've been focusing less on what an offensive player can do and more on what the defense can stop and what kind of personnel that they have. So metrics I love to use now is something like we have great affiliations with like fantasy points, like you can get man coverage or zone coverage, defensive rates, defensive tendencies like cover 2 or cover 3 rates when they're playing zone defenses, and then which players succeed the most versus those types of coverages. Then you're able to look at, route participation, depth of route, cornerback matchups. As the season goes along, you could even start to use DVOA to be able to measure certain defenses. I will say for DVOA coming into this season, which is a good stat from FTN, a lot of it is going to be last year's data. I mean, week 1, when we go in, we kind of are married to what we saw a little bit in preseason and last year's data. So as the season goes on and we get more data, that only helps with our touchdown bets. So that would be the main thing that I would say from a research standpoint, is that box score context is key and not all stats are created equal.
Yeah, I think it's almost a mixture, right? Because sometimes you see teams feed a guy for a certain range of games. So, like, knowing somebody has scored in 7 or 8 straight games or whatever it is most likely going to be information that everyone knows and that's out there and it's baked into the line. But having that information when you're doing this, I think is still important. But I think when you're actually doing research player to player and trying to find like an edge on some odds, I think doing some of the things that you were discussing is probably more of a last year or two kind of innovation in the touchdown betting industry, right? Like, I agree with you. I think the coverages when you're talking about wide receivers and tight ends has become more important, at least recently, because I think the data is cleaner. I think the data is better. And I think, it's still a little niche. So I think there is, edges there that may not be in other places. And I really do look at participation, like routes on pass attempts, like making sure that the player, especially if, again, it's a wide receiver or tight end, is going to be on the field, available, getting at least looks out there. Because, again, he can't score a touchdown more or less in that role if he's not out there running routes. So I think, we used to look a lot more at targets, but I think, actually participating in these circumstances becomes just as valuable. So that is, and also, end zone targets, red zone, like things like that, actually getting looks so they don't have to have explosive plays to score touchdowns are other angles as well.
And I think that another thing too, Evan, is sports books aren't dumb. They're going to eventually adapt, and those edges that I've
Definitely.
just shown of like on the defensive side, those are going to shrink too. And then as a touchdown better, you're going to have to adapt, find different edges. So really, what's just happened over the last few seasons is just the edges have shrunk, even though I would just
Like
say that they're
everything
still,
else.
yes, in sports betting as it's gotten larger and larger. And I think the main thing that I would just say is that there are still edges out there. You just have to dig a little bit harder, which means that you just can't use the surface stats to be able to find them.
You just got to find your Nick Westbrook Akine, which we will talk about a little bit later. But let's
What a
go
guy.
in. Yeah, let's go into the eye test here, because I think what's intriguing is we all watch the games. We all love football. We all love Red Zone. We're all watching the primetime game. So most fans, bettors, investors are all seeing the touchdowns, going through the data. Like, we all seem to be on a level playing field, or at least more of a level playing field than maybe we have been in the past. So I'm curious what your thought is wow, this player looks really good. He's scoring touchdowns. Let me just keep betting him, which we're going to call here is the eye test.
Yeah, and I find what happens is the touchdown odds don't reflect who's throwing the ball. Like, I think
That's
that is
interesting.
something that the quarterback, I find, weighs way more heavier now, especially if we're just using receiver touchdown props, like as an example. So like we see these a candidate every year where they get 10 plus targets a game and they just get not even close to a sniff in the end zone, right? Like in 2022, that was Deontay Johnson with the Steelers. He finished top 10 in targets, 0 touchdowns on the year. In 2023, Garrett Wilson, another guy, top 10 in targets. But again, Zach Wilson throwing the ball, Joe Flacco a little bit as well, but again, only scored in 2 of 17 games that he played. And then 2024, this one's probably going to ruffle some feathers, Evan. I think it's Brock Bowers last year who was that, because sportsbooks feasted off of the bartender football fan mindset of always do, like, look at all these targets, we have to bet them, but they're not looking at who's throwing the ball. Like in Deontay Johnson's case, you had Mason Rudolph, Zach Wilson in Garrett Wilson's case last year. I mean, we trashed this guy repeatedly. Gardner Minshew throwing the ball, just awful quarterbacks. So all the metrics and even the odds can sometimes line up where you want to consider those wide receivers, but plus EV odds doesn't always necessarily mean a plus EV offense, right? So Brock Bowers, let's talk about him, because he's going to be somebody that is very hyped up coming into week 1. He was 6th in total targets last year. He looks the part. But let's just talk about his touchdown production. 5 touchdowns last year. And despite his lack of touchdown production in the second half of the season, Evan, you were starting to see his touchdown odds continuously drop despite not scoring. So from week 13 onward, Brock Bowers had touchdown odds that ranged from plus 165 to plus 190. Aiden O'Connell was his quarterback. That's a huge red flag for me. That's empty calories, right? Like now, so that's what we saw last year in that trash of an offense. Now imagine this year, they've got Ashton Jeanty, you've got Geno Smith, you've got Pete Carroll. The hype train is going to be out of control for the Raiders. And right now, when I'm looking around now at Brock Bowers, his touchdown odds are anywhere between plus 140 and plus 155. Evan, that's just, you're buying so high on this
Yeah, it's
right now. If you're
short.
going to be betting on Brock Bowers to score a touchdown, I'm not saying he's not going to score. I'm not saying that he isn't awesome. I'm saying that the odds are not value at plus 150. You've got to try to get somewhere around plus 200 for him, given that the touchdown production just has not been there yet. It's kind of one of those, I got to see it to believe it sometimes if we go back to the eye test part.
Yeah, the eye test is interesting, though, because you would look at the move from O'Connell to Geno and say that's an advantage, but it looks like it's kind of baked into his odds, especially because he hasn't been a consistent scorer. The other one I was thinking of is, again, I think you're kind of right here. I think there's an approach here that's interesting where people ignore maybe sometimes the actual quarterback throwing in the ball. Like, I look at Garrett Wilson again, like how much can we rely on Justin Fields to be a consistent passer, right? But I think that's an example I was looking at. And then you kind of look at Indy, right? Like, I don't necessarily know we know who the quarterback is going to be there, but do we trust either guy to get Downs and Pittman enough work? Like, I think some of these different circumstances might be more interesting than others, but I do think the quarterback has something to do with it. And I do think the Jets is one I've circled as, Wilson's a ridiculous talent, but, Fields has never been, especially with his rushing ability, right? The stats end up getting split a little bit.
And Yeah. And really what that means, though, Evan, is just kind of transitioning to the next thing of what I wanted to talk about was it's just about having kind of like an odds cutoff, like where you don't necessarily, I'm basically stop forcing touchdown bets if the odds aren't giving you value. So I'm somewhat considered like an originator of touchdown bets as far as the odds go, meaning like my odds technically will give me more sharper lines than some sports books for closing touchdown odds. But one of the things that I started doing when I was back in 2018, when I kind of first was starting to do this, is I used to just take like a primetime game and I would write down a list of every player and just write down what I think like their touchdown odds should be. And then I would try to find the discrepancies and then I would bet. And it worked out. It was a nice little start. And then obviously the sports books, they've gotten much sharper. Their touchdown odds, they just don't have as much edges or discrepancies like we used to see. But now you can find models online, whether it be free, you can use them at Action Network where they can generate fair expected odds for touchdown props. And then that allows you to create that odds cutoff, which means that if a player goes past a certain threshold, it's just no longer bettable. So a guy, for example, if we have, Evan, if we're looking at a guy and we have him at minus 120 or maybe a coin flip like minus 115, but the touchdown odds are plus 150 and our research is lining up, we should place that bet. That's a plus EV bet. That I won't knock those kinds of bets. But on the flip side, I see this all the time. Expected fair odds around plus 150, and then it's plus 110, and then they force it anyway because they're like, this guy's so due, he's got to score. And it's like, man, you're leaving value on the table here. So that's the main thing in general. I just try to tell people, like with betting touchdowns, is that just because there's a game on doesn't mean you need to force 4 or 5 anytime touchdown bets, a multi-touchdown bet, 3 first touchdown bets. Like you're going to get so exposed if you do that, especially because what we have tracked over the last few years now is primetime games, especially for some of the more prominent sports books. Their initial odd releases for anytime touchdowns are heavily skewed for popular players. They don't want to get burned. They don't want to put a guy at plus 150 when he should be at plus 110. So more than likely, especially for the most popular guys, you're likely betting into a bad number and you're not maximizing your profitability. And even as a recreational bettor, that is still something that you want to do. So if you have that odds cutoff or even just an expected odds where you say, okay, this is too rich for me, I can't do it, it can just put your mind at ease about having FOMO for not having a bet, especially in a very popular primetime game.
Yeah, and I think most people who bet kind of consistently will know this as well. But if you do some parlays between some touchdown scores in that primetime game, they're also going to be cut as well. Like not only are the odds going to be juiced, but when you toss them together in a parlay, it won't add up to exactly what.
Not the correlated odds of what it's supposed to be.
Correct. So it all kind of gets cut there. I guess one interesting question I would have for you when it comes to, because the next section is going to be minus odds touchdown scores. So this is a little bit of a connection to that. But I'm curious, obviously you can have projections and edges in terms of 2 touchdown scores, right? Like betting them to score 2 touchdowns in the game. And I think that becomes an interesting topic for me when you get to minus odds for 1 touchdown, especially when you talk about running backs. You get an early touchdown, then the second bet is basically the rest of the game. And I think more recently you're seeing some of the bell cows, even some wide receivers getting 2 touchdowns. So what is just your thought process when, and I think it works really specifically for those guys priced like minus 115 to minus 150 range, who you actually see some value in because maybe they should be minus 200. But do you consider that second touchdown? Is that like part of a unit? Like how do you really handle that week to week?
Well, if you're talking about like somebody like Saquon Barkley, like I'm just thinking of like the guys who are at the top of the list, like him or Derrick Henry or whatever. Those are kind of a case by case basis. But I probably in those instances, I more often than not, the anytime touchdown, what you see has the mega steam on it where there's no value, but then the 2 touchdown prop does end up showing a little bit of value. So there are instances where we do see that. I mean, Saquon was a perfect example in the playoffs, right? So, but in that instance, I am not against betting on a 2 touchdown prop if it does show return value. But for me, again, we talk about this all the time. There's just so much more value everywhere else that I've been burned so many times on taking like a high end running back or get like Saquon would be the best example where you would just get vultured by Jalen Hurts or something like that. So it would just kill you to want to do that. But there are other guys though, I find where you can find positive value on the anytime touchdown and then also on the 2 touchdowns. Like I think of like somebody like T Higgins or Terry McLaurin like this past year where I was hitting those guys, but they were already at like plus 200 just for an anytime touchdown. So we're already seeing positive value, but then also the matchup yielded higher floor or higher ceiling of potential, right? And then you're seeing instead of a 2 touchdown prop for T Higgins, where it probably should be at like 15-1, we're seeing it closer to like 20-1 because of the matchup. So it's like, okay, at that point, I would put like 0.75 on anytime touchdown and then 0.25 on 2 touchdowns.
Got
And
it.
then that way, if the anytime touchdown hits, I'm still feeling good and I don't feel like and I don't end up losing any profit from the gamble or the risk on the 2 touchdown prop as well. So those are the kinds of the ways that I would go about it. But for the higher end guys, you can find value on 2 touchdown props again, but those are, I would argue, kind of hit or miss, just because again, from a 2 touchdown prop perspective, they're not hitting that rate where they would yield a plus 350 every game, right? So I think with Saquon and Derrick Henry, there are games, that you could find value on it. I just would be very cautious and make sure that you're not overextending yourself on a 2 touchdown prop, especially when you're not getting probably the most return on value.
Yeah, you need to pick your spots. I guess this is just a personal anecdote from myself, but I seem to feel that running backs are a bit more predictive on a 2 touchdown market than wide receivers, just because I think, at least personally, I can predict carries, maybe times of carries, a little bit better than times of targets or things of that nature, because I think they're a little more volatile and kind of depends a little bit more on game script, obviously depending on the team. But that's just a personal anecdote myself. So let's go into now this next section, because we're talking about Saquon. We, last year was Derrick Henry, but minus odds touchdown scores. I know you have data team to team, year to year. Now I think this also works out based off of some players, right? Like Henry scores in 15 or 16 of 17 games. What does that actually mean for his yearly total? So why don't you just kind of walk into this for us?
Sure. So I guess I'll just preface this with like, I'm still in the camp of avoiding betting on touchdown props at minus odds. That doesn't mean that I'm telling people not to do it. Just a lot of the time I don't end up finding the value on those. But the tide is starting to turn a little bit on that. Over the last 2 seasons, we've seen a huge swing on players with minus odds to score. So I've tracked the anytime touchdown odds every year since 2020. So from 2020 to 2022, the hit rate on anytime touchdown props with minus odds was always under 50%. It ranged from 47% to 48.5%. And it was around 12.5 players per week that would be at minus odds. But in 2023, that saw a huge spike that went up to 54.6% with an average of 13.5 per week. Now I know somebody might hear that and say like 6%, that doesn't seem like much, but that's actually like a huge swing.
Yeah, that's a lot
over the course of a season, especially for somebody like myself who tracks these. And even last season, we still saw it hit over 50%. It was at 52.3%. But then what we saw, which is going back to the Derrick Henry Saquon argument and to whether or not there's value on them, we were seeing just under 19 players per week. So 6 more players per week at minus odds and still hitting at over 50%. So that obviously lends the question, why did that happen? Well, for myself, what I've noticed is a big part is sportsbooks are obviously slowly reducing the edges on these props. So you're seeing a guy who, like I say, a running back 1 who might open at plus 105. By the time we get to kickoff, those edges have shrunk. That's now down to minus 115. So he would fall in the minus odds category. But also, I find bettors have become smarter too. The basement of the recreational bettor and their knowledge, I find, has risen over the last few seasons. So now when they see a running back 1 at plus 110, they're not going to wait till Sunday morning to place that bet. They're going to place that bet as soon as it gets released on like a Tuesday morning, and then you'll see it drop to like minus 110 by kickoff because of the odds movements from large betting influencers and large followings and lots of money coming in on that specific player. So to me, that might actually lend itself to some of the parlay bettors who like to do those 5-leg stacks of, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Josh Jacobs, like you name it, basically the 5 best touchdown scorers in the NFL. But now you're starting to see some of those actually yield fruit. That was over the last 2 seasons, the parlay bettors are seeing return on that. However, this is my big pushback. It's not just cut and dry, right? Like Derrick Henry, let's talk about Derrick Henry, because he was somebody who had minus odds in every game last year, and he scored in 13 of 17 games. He was one of two players. Him and Saquon Barkley had minus odds to score in every game. So you might have had some successes using him as your anchor leg, for example, on a 4-leg parlay. But if you bet him on the weeks that he didn't score, like from week 12 to week 16, you would have just gotten crushed, because look at the touchdown odds that he had for these weeks. From week 12, minus 245, week 13, minus 215, week 15, minus 295. Those are high implied probabilities for an anytime touchdown, and your parlay is up in smoke because Derrick Henry didn't fall into the end zone. And that drives me crazy when I think of the parlay odds, because when you make a parlay like that, you think, well, I don't have to worry about Derrick Henry, not in this game, no way. And then it doesn't work out. And even then, when you look at the full season scope of Derrick Henry from an anytime touchdown perspective, which is part of the reason why I don't like betting on minus odds, if you had bet 1 unit on him for the entire season, because he played all 17 games, you'd only made plus 2.8 units in profit. Now, some people, they might look at that and say, hey, I like that ROI, that's fine. But to put that in perspective, for anytime touchdown profits in the NFL, Derrick Henry was 116th overall, 7th place just on his own team. So that means that in a given week, you could have had more value betting on guys like Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman. There's just so many different players, Isaiah Likely. So to me, there's just so much value elsewhere for touchdown scores that I just find it, I don't want to get caught up in betting favorites, especially when I'm putting probably a lot more of a higher stake to offset the odds that I'm getting at minus 245 or minus 295. And then he's the one who lets you down. It's just, I've been burned by that so many times. And I find if recreational bettors and people who are just kind of starting and wanting to have fun with this, if they go in with this mindset that Derrick Henry is going to be the lock of the week, I got a bridge to sell you. Like, it's not something that is cut and dry.
It's definitely not. I think there's something to the fact that each time, it depends what type of bettor you are. Each time you bet a touchdown score, it should be like you're betting a point spread. It's, what do you have the game at? What do you have the touchdown odds at? Mm-hmm. If it doesn't match, don't bet it. And it probably should be the same way in terms of putting that player in your parlay, or however it ends up working. Now, if you want to have fun and put in a $5 bet with a bunch of touchdown scores, yeah, Derrick Henry, at least the version of him last year, is most likely going to be in there, because you're going to make that assumption he's going to score. So that's I think it works both ways based off of just kind of how you're approaching this. My one, so out of all the stats you kind of just gave us in terms of minus odds touchdown scores, to me, almost 20 players being minus odds on a given week, I think, is something that just keeps lighting in my head. As we've talked about, the book's kind of moving one direction in terms of maybe juicing some of the stuff that people tend to like more. That, to me, is just going to go up. Like, you have 340 players in 24 who were minus when you had 245 the year before. And I think those numbers and what they project to be potentially in 2025, which I could see it getting to 20. I could see it getting to 400 plus in a given season. So I think, to me at least, it makes me want to look at the 200s, the plus 200s, the plus 300s, and the plus 400s as being kind of the forgotten bunch. Like the tight end on some teams, the second or third wide receivers. Like, I do feel like there is value because we're getting so much juicier on these expected touchdown scores at the top of the board. That's my opinion.
Well, and I find the one big takeaway, like you mentioned, it went from 245 to 340 year over year. The fact that the win percentage did not really drop that much, only about 2%,
yeah, that is
throughout the season, is just very indicative of the fact that. And then the other thing too, Evan, think about what we've talked about over the last few years about how touchdown projection and production in general has just, like, remember 2022 where it just dropped off a cliff, like as far as how many touchdowns were scored in a given season. And then 2023, 2024, we started to see a little bit of a rebound last year, but it just, in general, if we're looking at the heyday of 2019 and 2020, where touchdown scoring was just crazy across the board, it's a different NFL now. And just, it's different on that mindset of just the touchdowns just aren't as plentiful, and the minus odds guys are hitting at a higher rate. So that's something to adjust to, something to keep in mind, especially when you're making your bets on a given week.
Without a doubt. So we are going to get into another section in a second, but football season is here, and we've got some huge improvements and updates coming on the award-winning Action Network app, which we're very excited to discuss in the weeks ahead. But to get the most out of the app, you still need to be an Action Pro subscriber. It's only with Action Network Pro you get real-time pick alerts from the entire Action Network team of experts. Plus, you can access pro projections powered by Sean Kerner and our predictive analytics team, plus a ton of other benefits. And right now, Action Network podcast listeners can save $20 off the annual price of Action Pro. Just go to actionnetwork.com/pro and use code POD20, POD20. That's actionnetwork.com/pro. Use code POD20 for $20 off the annual price of Action Pro. And I'll be in the app. Gilles in the app. Sean Kerner, Raybon, Brandon, all of us in the app for football season, basketball season coming up right after that. So check it out, POD20, actionnetwork.com/pro. All right, Gilles. So we talked about the minus odds. We talked about the data. We've got our, 3 commandments off the top. So now we've got profits, which I think going through some of these players, some of the players that have floated to the top, all I want to say is before we get into this conversation, I think it's smart to remind people that this category is much more about the price than actually getting into the end zone. Like some of these guys, just based off of, are you going to put $100 on a player for 17 weeks? And if he scores 2 or 3 of those weeks, you end up being profitable. It's a way to bet, but it's also, trying to sometimes catch a falling dagger. So I'll let you start off here and we'll have some fun with this.
Well, the guy who was the falling dagger of the year was definitely a Titans tight end, of course, because they're always at like 20-1 to score. And one guy who scored 3 times last year, Nick Vannett, if you had just taken him every week, you were seeing prices of 28-1, 22-1. He finished at 51 units in profit, the most profitable player, and which is wild to me because his teammate, in my opinion, was the MVP of the anytime touchdown market last year, and he still finished about 10 units less in profit. And that was actually Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who what always ends up happening in the offseason is like I'll be looking at players, I'll be looking at rosters and matchups, and then I'll look at the touchdown odds and I'll look at the Titans, and I was like, wait a minute, where did Nick Westbrook-Ikhine go? Just like a third receiver where I just forgot that he moved on, and now I'm like, oh crap, he's with the Dolphins. Oh my gosh, and he's playing the Colts in week 1, a team that he scored on both times last year. So Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, only 32 catches on the year, and he scored in 8 of 17 games. He had a 2 touchdown game as well, which again just put his profits through the roof. But he was also one of 2 players, Evan, to rank in the top 20 in both profits for the anytime touchdown market and the first touchdown market, which again, I'm very interested to see how he's going to be used in this Dolphins offense, given that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are in the best shapes of their lives, as they always are. And, so we're going to week 1 and we're going to be playing against the Colts. And he scored on them both times in 2024. I'm already seeing him around plus 400 to score again. So they're very much giving him the same treatment as last year. But one thing that was funny about NWI as the season, like, sportsbooks weren't really ready to budge on that. Like, remember when he was first starting to hit, he was around 5-1, maybe even plus 450. And then by the time he had a 5 touchdown game streak, they finally put it around like plus 300. And then he still scores again. So that's one of those players where I would have stopped betting him by the time we got to week 9 or week 10, where it was just like, okay, like this guy's been priced out and he's still producing. So to me, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine was the anytime touchdown MVP of last season. Now, of course, quarterback touchdown markets, I always love to look at that. The year before, it was Josh Allen who led the NFL in quarterback anytime touchdown profits. This actually surprised me. The guy who ended up leading the profits for quarterbacks was Bryce Young with the Carolina Panthers at plus 18.5 units. He scored in 5 of 14 games. And we kind of, I think, forget that opening month of the Panthers season where they were just god awful, and he got benched. You know what I mean? So coming back, I don't think a lot of people were really expecting much from him. But I mean, he's had some pretty big hits throughout the year. He had a plus 400 to start the year. He had week 14 versus Cowboys, a plus 750. Actually scored 5 of his 6 touchdowns over the last 6 games of the season, which could be very interesting to see if that carries over to the new season. So right now, I'm hoping to get odds of maybe plus 450 or better, especially if they're playing the Jags in week 1, who do play a lot of man coverage, which would open up more scrambling opportunities. But Bryce Young, to me, is upward arrow right now for quarterbacks, just because I find a lot of the pocket guys like a Joe Burrow or a Patrick Mahomes, they have the ability, they just don't bother doing it. And they're always they're very priced to the point where they're going to score a touchdown, and those that's not their playing style. So whereas Bryce Young, I think that's kind of what he has to depend on a little bit, because their offense was struggling last year. I think they're going to struggle a little bit again this year. So I think Bryce Young is a good candidate to score some rushing touchdowns earlier in the season.
Yeah, let's go one by one here. So I think the NWI stuff with Miami is kind of funny, because you just assume that Tyreek or Waddle will have no touchdowns, through a few weeks, and he'll have like 3, and he'll be vulturing stuff. So something's in the works there, because I believe he'll be the 3rd option, at least from a wide receiver point of view.
And it's not like those two are pictures of perfect health either, right?
Yeah.
So eventually, we could see them
Completely.
miss some time, and he gets elevated in his role.
And I think Bryce Young's scrambling, and we talked about this a lot on the pod last year, kind of led to their success more or less in the second half. Like after he came back from benching, I think he kind of realized that he needed to be a little bit of a dual versatility quarterback in that sense. And I think it really helped him in that offense. So I think it'll be intriguing to see if that continues. And the other guy from a quarterback point of view, I know you've looked his way, but he was hurt a lot of last year, would be Trevor Lawrence as well in Jacksonville. Because I think his odds when he was at his peak were kind of dipping down, because he was such a runner when it came to the red zone, I feel like. And I think his injury, maybe those odds will spike up a little bit again, but he definitely tends to run in certain circumstances. So that'll be intriguing, especially week 1. Maybe they go against each other, and we get maybe like a parlay in there or something.
Well, and it's not like the Panthers' run defense has improved that much, and they were awful last year too. So it would be a very ideal matchup for him. What the thing about Trevor Lawrence, which is just interesting, and really it was that whole offense last year with Doug Peterson, is that they couldn't really figure out the run game at all, and they were just offensively very limited in what they could do, despite having what was told to be a generational quarterback, right? So I think with that offense, Trevor Lawrence, in my opinion, depending on the matchup, like if we're just using week 1, should probably be around plus 300. But the thing is, given the circumstance, given that they're playing the Panthers, it would not shock me if we see around plus 220, which is just kind of below my wheelhouse of value on that
too short
right now. But but at the same time, just like Burrow, Mahomes, like a lot of these quarterbacks who were like, 6, like they have the ability to be able to scramble. It's just a lot of the time they're just maybe too clumsy. Maybe they just don't want to bother doing it. But if we could get more Jalen Hurts in the world, maybe we'd have a lot more fun betting quarterback touchdown props.
I know you love yourself a good, quarterback touchdown prop, which is why I brought it up. But let's talk about week 1 now, because these are all the matchups are out there. I think we have touchdown props for some books, so it's a little scarce at the moment. But I know you have some early leans and some bets here. So why don't you tell the listeners not only the player, but if he's changed teams, what team he's on, a little bit of a recapper here.
For sure, yeah. So my early touchdown leans for week 1, we've already talked about Jake Ferguson off the top. That's more of an opener primetime game. But just from week 1, the Sunday games, I'm going back to that Panthers Jaguars game. I love Adam Thielen in this game. He's especially at odds over plus 300. The guys that we talked about that are maybe kind of getting forgotten, in that range of plus 200 to plus 400, because I mean, he led the Panthers in targets per game in the second half of the season. And right now, they're pricing the Panthers as if Ted McMillan's going to come in and be Jamar Chase. Like he's around plus 140 to score. And Adam Thielen has been the most trusted target for Bryce Young in his career as a Panther. So I love Adam Thielen at plus 310 against that Jags defense, especially if their defense does carry over some of their tendencies from last year, where they were the number 1 team in man coverage. And Adam Thielen led the Panthers in yards per route run against man coverage last season.
I like Thielen. I was looking at some of the tight ends there. I was considering Sanders. I'm a big Sanders guy in
Mhm.
Carolina. But obviously they have Tremble. I think Tremble might be injured at the moment, which I'm looking at it. So maybe I like Sanders at some long odds, but I do think that game will be a little. I think it could be high scoring, so I kind of like Thielen in that spot. And yeah, McMillan, it's 165, and even when we get closer to kick, if it's down to plus 150 range, I think it's just a little short. And I'm a big McMillan fan. And all the pods we were doing around the draft, I liked him in that spot. I know other people kind of questioned it, but yeah, 150, 165 seems a little short.
Just a
All
little
right,
bit, you know.
just a tad. Who's your second bet?
So I went to that Rams offense. You wanted to talk about that tight end that you try to find at 3-1 or better. Tyler Higbee, to me, I think is going to be very instrumental in this Rams offense this year. And Sean McVay has shown that when Tyler Higbee is healthy, he does get consistent use in this offense. Last year, he scored 3 touchdowns in 5 games coming back, one in the playoffs. He's another year removed, recovered from that ACL injury as well. So I think Tyler Higbee, especially with the fact that you got Puka and Devontae Adams on either side, and Kyron Williams in the backfield, the fact that we're getting Higbee around 3-1 in this offense that I have is, in my opinion, I think is going to be a top 5 offense if Matthew Stafford is healthy. I love Tyler Higbee at this price at plus 310.
Always scared about Colby Parkinson, but I agree. I like the tight end spot, especially with it. Stafford tends to look there. He likes that in the red zone, so I definitely see that as an option.
I was a little worried about Colby myself because I did look up to see kind of what his
Have to
snap
say it.
counts
Had
were
to
and what
say
did
it.
he play. I know, but we felt the same way. I was like, oh, I don't know, is Colby getting red zone targets? Is he playing? And one thing I noticed is that his production and his snap counts just completely dropped off a cliff once
That's good.
Higbee came back. So I'm hoping that that is the case when we go into week 1.
I love your third bet here, so I kind of have to have you start on this right away because this is such a Gilles Gallant special. So
Yeah,
give me this.
it's so we're gonna go to the Titans Broncos game. I love Cam Ward to score a touchdown. Now, obviously, in his college career, that wasn't really his bag, but again, in this offense with the receiving options that he's going to have, I think he's going to have to scramble more. And when you're playing against a defense like the Broncos, who tend to play more man coverage with Patrick Surtain back there, that tends to open up more scrambles for quarterbacks. And as a result, even last year we saw the Broncos, their edge rushers second in pressure rate. So that's, in my opinion, going to lead to more intended passes that have to then become scrambles. Now, if Cam Ward scores, I'm not saying it's going to be the opening touchdown of the game or that it's going to be a winning touchdown, but in my opinion, where I see this happening is probably in the second half where they're already down 28-7, and then it's more garbage time than anything. But at plus 340, I think this is similar to the Jaden Daniels situation that we saw last year where he was being priced around plus 200 to score 22-1 for 2 touchdowns last year against the Broncos, or pardon me, the Buccaneers in week 1 last year. And part of my reasoning of why I said you should get him now is because if he does score, you're never going to see that price again. And I was right. You did not see his odds over 2-1 to score an anytime touchdown the rest of the year. And for 2 touchdowns, you might saw 12-1 at best. So kind of more trying to get ahead of the market. And Cam Ward, given that he's the number 1 overall pick, I'm not really worried about him getting benched or anything like that. So especially now Will Levis is out for the year. So Cam Ward at plus 340. So a little 3-pack of plus 300s to get us started for week 1.
Would be scared about maybe like they don't want to put him in the line of fire early on. But I mean, aside from that, he's a kid. They're not, expected to be great. Let him run. Also, running backs of Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears don't exactly get me all scared that the running backs are going to vulture touchdowns. So I think it's a decent outlook on it. And I think there are some things we don't really know going into the season, which I think sometimes when there's questions, it leads to value when you predict correctly. All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Getting ahead of the market like that when there's still questions up in the air is typically where you could find a lot more value in touchdown props than not.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of going out on an edge here. I mean, we don't know much about what Ward will look like in this offense in the pros. College is a different game. But given, his ability and kind of what you see out of Tennessee's offense, I think it's definitely worthwhile to look into it into week 1 and just see like, okay, he didn't scramble once in this game. Maybe we need to take a look at this again. All right. This has been our first pod in a while, so Gilles, this has been an absolute pleasure. But that'll do it for today's episode of the Action Network podcast. Tell everyone where they can find out more of your information, more of your data, more of this touchdown greatness.
Awesome. All right. So the handle is GDog5000. That's on all handles. GDAWG5000. So Action App, X, Instagram, whatever. So here's what we got coming up. So, of course, Touchdown Show coming back first Sunday of the week on September 7th. So that's going to be at 11:30 a.m. Eastern on the Action as part of the Action Network Power Hour. So we're coming back for season 4. So that's great. Of course, I'm going to have anytime touchdown notes and tips for all 32 teams for a season preview. Then we're going to have, of course, our weekly 180 challenge touchdown parlay that we do every Saturday. I'm going to also be doing, I did this the last 2 years. We're doing it again this year. It is my weekly anytime touchdown preview where I give touchdown picks for every single game. And I am just pumped because also another market that I still love to do and that we didn't get as much chance to talk about today is interception props. One of my favorite markets to play. I'm going to be doing those again as well. Those will come out every Friday on actionnetwork.com.
And we also love your live interception props as well. We've seen you talk about a bunch of that stuff on social.
Well, and if anything, Evan, where we're probably going to be a lot more this year, dude, is probably not as much on X. And I find that place just to be a little too Negatron. I think the best place to hang out now for sweating primetime games and live betting is the Action Network Discord. I love hanging out in there with our users and talking bets, talking smack. It's great. So that's probably where you'll see me a lot more this year during primetime games.
Yeah, across all of our different brands, we've got a few different Discords, and all of our experts hang out in there during live games. And it's going to be great. Can't wait for the season. I'll have a bunch of articles up. I'll do my weekly stuff every week of the year as well. But this is just the start of it. We'll have a lot more pods to come and so much more NFL betting content as we get closer and closer to kickoff. So make sure to subscribe to the show, and don't forget to download the free award-winning Action Network app. Sign up for Action Pro for immediate access to expert picks and analysis. For Gilles Gallant, I'm Evan Abrams. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Good luck with all your bets. Bon chance.